This is a podcast by Wellhouse Church, where we talk about what it's like to be a Christian Monday through Saturday, to live as a person of faith in a culture against faith. What's going on, man?
Not much, man. I'm good. How are you?
Doing all right. Pretty happy. Got some stuff for the trailer today.
Yeah, feeling good. Starting to feel more like a home.
Yeah, it's slowly coming together, man. Pretty excited. So, okay. Last week was a bit of a doozy. Last several weeks have been a bit of a doozy on this podcast because we were talking about politics, right?
Yeah, but on Let's Talk, there's no softball. I mean, look, if you're talking about the intersection of faith and culture,
yeah,
and specifically a culture that's against faith,
yeah,
like every conversation is going to be trying. It's going to be a struggle. Climb aboard the struggle bus, listeners. I mean, like that. It is what it is. True transformation happens in hard conversations.
Yeah, good point. Yeah,
and so like we're going to have hard conversations on this podcast.
Yeah, I mean, that's a part of our job, right?
Yeah, and I think, there's a balance. I mean, having the hard conversations on Let's Talk is one thing, but being encouraged through spiritual practices on practicing presence is a whole different thing. And like there's a venue for that, and we have it. Go listen to practicing presence. But like on Let's Talk, there's no softballs.
No, yeah, for sure. And also, if you want to hear us BS and drink beer, go listen to Pints and Perspectives.
Yeah, and that we're just talking about theology and all the different realms of theology. And
this podcast is for us to talk about the hard topics.
Yeah, hard topics. I mean, we're going to talk about mental health. We're going to talk about social justice. We're going to talk about all the things that you don't want to talk about. We're going to talk about cancel culture and how it's ruining people.
Yeah. So let's this next series that we're starting, it's not as controversial.
I think it's equally controversial.
Well, that's true because it can be a bit partisan.
Not a bit. I mean, it's pretty much partisan.
Not always, not in all scenarios, but so for our listeners, we're about to talk about creation care.
They would know that from the title. They've clicked on the episode.
Fair enough. But basically, we're going to be talking about the changes that's happening, right? We're going to be talking about climate change. Should we care as Christians?
Yeah, as Christians, should we care? So one thing you got to do is you got to take your mind out of your political worldview. Because, the right says it's not a thing or minimizes it. Mm-hmm. The left says it's a big thing and emphasizes it. Yeah. Take your political hat off, because I promise you both of those are about the money. Mm. Like, strip that hat off. Like, let's just have an actual conversation about creation care or creation in general and what's happening to it. Isolated in a silo all on its own. Yeah.
There is, lots of people that have said through the years that in these topics that can become polarizing, the truth is always somewhere in the middle.
Yeah, for sure. I think any extreme is a dangerous place to be.
Absolutely.
So you're going to be far better in the middle on anything. It got brought to our attention this weekend that we're pretty hard on fundamentalists.
Yeah.
And that's probably true. It is our heritage. It's
not probably true. It
is true. Well, it's our heritage. It's the kind of churches we grew up in. And so we can pretty easily identify the problems there. Mm. And I feel like I'm equally hard on Protestant liberals, like not believing in the supernatural, not believing that Jesus is a real person. Like, I feel like I'm equally hard on them, but I really try to be in the middle. Yeah. I try to be sensitive to the things that science is bringing to light, but I try to be true to historic orthodoxy and theological conservatism. So I feel like I try to ride that line, and maybe in riding that line, I end up being harder on one side than I am on another. But I do try to ride that line because I believe that principle that if you're an extreme on either end, you've probably missed it. Yeah.
It's a dangerous place to be. Which, by the way, we apologize if we've offended anybody for being too hard.
Yeah, we do. Now, there is something to say that if we have offended them, they're probably not listening to this, which is unfortunate. We didn't mean to offend anybody.
Yeah, but if you come back and you're listening to this, we really are sorry if we offended you.
Yeah, it was not our intent.
No. However, creation care.
Yep.
Right. We're going to talk about the Genesis 1.
Yeah, probably next week we're going to talk about Genesis 1 and 2.
Yeah. And how that's important to the overall narrative.
Yep.
And we're also going to talk about God made you and God made the earth, right? So shouldn't you care about the earth?
Yeah. Well, in that one, just the kind of teaser here is the thing I get from everybody is if I ask them, why does God care about you? Well, he made me. Well, he also made the earth.
Yeah.
So doesn't that afford him something related to it? And I think maybe one of the most important things to actually have a conversation about is actually just what's happening in the earth, in creation right now. I think that really is an important piece. I mean, we're seeing half of California burnt to a crisp.
Yeah.
We saw half of Australia burnt to a crisp. We're seeing natural disasters across the earth.
I mean, we had record amount of hurricanes this season, right? That in the Gulf, that's scary.
Yeah.
Now, if you're one of those people that doesn't believe in climate change, that's okay. It's not one of the essentials of faith, right?
It's not.
But what I would challenge you with is look around, right? Just try to open your eyes and see what's happening in the earth. How would you explain that? How would you explain these fires? How would you explain all of these natural disasters?
Or how would you explain that since I've been alive, we live in Texas, and specifically Southeast Texas. I mean, there's been whole years where I didn't ever feel like we had a winter.
Yeah.
I mean, the lowest it got was like in the 50s.
I don't remember the exact stats on this, but in my environmental science class that I took, I don't know, a couple years ago, we have had about on average 2 or 3 degree rises over the last 50 years, something like that. On average, every year it goes up 2 or 3 degrees.
Yeah, that doesn't surprise me.
I think that's a bit off. Somebody
because that would mean that it's 100 degrees increase.
Yeah,
if it's year over year,
it was something extravagant like that though. It actually shocked.
It's a shocking amount of
But the point is that this is a real thing.
Yeah, I think, and truth is, if you've clicked on here, we probably don't have to convince you that climate change is a thing. And I think for most people, and specifically educated people, and once again, not to disregard all the things we said earlier about fundamentalists, but by and large, it's the fundamentalists that don't believe in those types of things because they disregard science. That's one of the premises of fundamentalism is to affirm the Bible over science. When science actually has some really good things to tell us. Every time I meet a true fundamentalist, it's like, oh, no, don't believe science. I'm like, do you go to the doctor?
Yeah.
He's like, that's science.
Right.
And so the truth is, if you're on here, we probably don't have to convince you that climate change is a thing. But I do think it's an important question because we don't talk about climate change in theological or congregational settings.
No.
We talk about climate change in political settings.
Yeah.
Which this is a problem because, well, I don't really know how to say this without giving away where we're going. But by and large, there have been a few areas where the church received a call from God and we let the government take it away from us. So healthcare was one of them. If you drive through the medical center, you'll see Methodist hospitals, you'll see Lutheran hospitals, you'll see St. Luke's. In California, there's a hospital called the Good Samaritan Hospital.
Like the church took care of healthcare.
Yeah, healthcare.
Like that was their job.
Healthcare was a church initiative.
Yeah.
The foster system was a church initiative. Marriage is an institution of the church. And the government, like we let the government come in and take these things.
And that's because we weren't doing it. The church wasn't doing a good job with it.
To some of it, I think we were not doing a good job with the foster care system.
Absolutely not.
And so that explains why they took it. But, you know, the government took some other things because there was money in it.
Right.
But either way, like there have been a few things throughout Christian history that were charges of the church that we just let the government take, like with very little rebuttal. And one of them is the conversation about creation care. I mean, that is a charge to the church. That's a charge to the first believer, Adam and Eve.
To tend the garden.
Yeah, so we're going to dive deeper into that text probably next week. But like, that is a charge to the church that we let the government take. And so for me, it's problematic that conversation exists only in political spectrums and spheres. I don't like that element of it.
Yeah, for sure. And you know what's so funny is because I've heard lots of Christians say, and I've even heard people who I wouldn't deem as wholly fundamental say that science is BS, right? But the problem is if creation care is a charge to the church and we are supposed to, so like say the church took over the EPA.
Okay.
Right? Say the church took over the EPA. How would we actually monitor climate change? How would we monitor?
Right.
It would have to be through science.
Right. We would. Yeah, absolutely.
Like there's no other way.
But truth is, I mean, and once again, this is to another point. We use science, even people that don't want to hold to science in creation, like they use it. How many people do you know that would have that position, and yet they would use like a depth finder on their boat, or they would use a weather app before they went hunting.
Yeah.
They would check to see what time the sun rose or the sun was going to rise or the sun was going to set. Like we use science all around us.
Yeah.
But it's just when we start bringing it to the Bible that people are like, oh, whoa, like, no, don't bring that over here.
Science doesn't belong in the Bible.
Right. And it's like, well, actually, maybe that's just not right. I mean, maybe the Bible's not trying to compete with science. Like maybe, if I could just throw this out here, maybe God's smarter than that. Maybe God kind of knew that we were going to have scientific developments when he instilled the inspiration of the Spirit and left gaps for that.
I mean, to be fair, every time you get in your car and turn on your ignition,
you're using
science.
Yeah.
So
the Industrial Revolution is scientific.
Absolutely. And so what's so funny, though, is God would have had to have created science. Like in some way, shape, or form, he created the possibility for science.
Well, some might argue he creates science, depending on how, and maybe depending on how you read the different stories would depict whether you would do this. I mean, you could take it to an extreme like a deist,
Mm-hmm.
or you could take it to an extreme where you just don't do, like, God doesn't create anything.
Right.
But if God is creator, then he also creates natural law.
Right. He set up certain institutions to work.
Yeah.
Right? Like gravity, and gravity is science.
Yeah, so the classic deist example would be that God is a master clockmaker and he sets the clock in motion.
Right.
Now, I think there's flaws with that, the deist model, because then God can't act inside of the clock once it's been set in motion.
Right.
So it denies any supernatural acts. But if you believe that God created, which I think to be an Orthodox Christian, you have to believe at some level God was the cause of creation.
Whether that was through the Big Bang or or through Adam and Eve in the garden, there was some level God instituted creation.
Yeah. Now, be on the lookout for an episode coming, or a series of episodes coming very soon on Pints and Perspectives about creation, because I want to put forward an argument that I don't think Big Bang and evolution are removed from the Genesis 1 and 2 narrative.
Yeah, I think I know where you're going. I think I've had this. We need to talk about this later.
Okay. So I don't think they're removed, and I don't think that the literary narrative of Genesis 1 and 2 forces you to deny what science has proven.
Yeah, no, I agree.
You need to change. You don't have to. You can't read it super literally.
Yeah.
But the foundational elements of the literary device of Genesis 1 and 2, the account, they're not removed from. They're not in contradiction to what science has shown us.
Yeah.
And so I think no matter how you read it, if you believe that God is creator, then you also believe that he made science.
Absolutely.
And
like you have to.
Well, and don't forget that Isaac Newton, one of the most famous scientists and mathematicians of all time, was a Christian. And his original intent, you may not have known this, Sir Isaac Newton, his original, like the thing that he set out to do was try to decide when Jesus was coming back.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, like that was the thing that spawned him into science and physics and metaphysics and math. It's because he was trying to pinpoint the time that Jesus would come back.
That's flipping cool.
Yeah, it is cool. It is cool. And I think...
Obviously, he never figured that out, but...
Yeah. So the conversation took a bit of a twist I didn't think it would take, but it's a good point to bring this up because this is a podcast about faith and culture. And whoever says that culture shouldn't influence your faith hasn't done much study of history.
Yeah.
Because faith is always influenced by culture.
Yeah.
And there was something that happened a long time ago, and I don't have just a ton of time to go into it, but there was a guy named Copernicus. So Galileo sets out to establish that the earth revolves around the sun rather than the sun revolving around the earth. And he never actually proves it. Like he sets it out there and he says, hey, Hattie's Comet is coming back this time.
Yeah.
Well, they never get to see it happen, right? So Copernicus comes on the scene and like he kind of expounds on Galileo's work. And sure enough, they prove through science that the earth revolves around the sun.
And what ended up happening?
Well, now here's the problem. At that point, nobody thought that.
Yeah.
I think everyone here believes that the earth revolves around the sun.
Yeah, at that time.
Nobody thought that.
Yeah.
And here's why. Because the Bible said that the earth stands still.
Mm-hmm.
It's in the Psalms. I can't remember exactly where. Just Google it. You'll find it. The Bible says that the earth stands still, that it is unmoving.
Mm-hmm.
So everybody said, oh, okay, well, the Bible is the foundation of science.
Yeah.
And then science came out and said, well, actually, no, that's wrong. And so, go ahead.
No, I'm waiting to see where you're going.
And so the church responds and gives the big, forget you science, and births a reaction against the scientific revolution, which then spawns at a very oversimplified level, fundamentalism and liberalism. Like they go to one extreme to the other. Liberalism says we're going to believe science over the Bible.
Yeah.
Fundamentalism says we're going to believe the Bible over science.
And what did we just talk about?
The truth is somewhere in the middle.
Yeah.
And so this is why, like, conservatives don't believe in climate change, or some conservatives don't believe in climate change, because they've been told that science is a lie.
Yeah.
They've been told that evolution is of the devil. They've been told that Big Bang's not the way it happened. They've been told that science and theology, or science and the Bible, are irreconcilable.
Yeah.
And so when someone comes on and says climate change is a thing, they really struggle to see that it's true, because it's science. Science is the thing that we don't want.
Church, that is the story that Cullen just told about Galileo and Copernicus. Not one of our finer moments throughout history. Some really bad things took place in that story.
People lost their lives over that.
Yeah, it was really bad. And it was this fight over science and scripture, which is more authoritative. Obviously,
yeah, it's really over the authority.
Right. Obviously, the Bible is authoritative, right? We can't deny that. But science is science, right?
Yeah, it's also authoritative. And I put this out there. Pretty much everybody here believes that the earth revolves around the sun.
Yeah.
Well, like, the Bible doesn't affirm that. Yeah. The Bible's actually in contradiction to that.
Yeah.
So it's like, okay, now that's a really easy one because it's low-hanging fruit. But it's like, okay, like, this is what happened. Like, that's just history. That's undeniable.
I'm sorry. I just thought about, like, what does the Bible say about flat earthers?
Yeah. That's
something we need to explore.
I hadn't thought about reading the Bible through that lens.
That's something we need to explore.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about reading the Bible through that lens. But I think all that to say, we can't be afraid of science.
No.
Like, science is a tool that God has given to people. And, like, it's valuable. Science, here's another part. Science has helped us identify the unreached people groups in need of the Bible, in need of the gospel.
Yeah. Most of the research that you see out there, they use the scientific method.
Yeah.
All psychology, sociology, anthropology, right? Even the social sciences, they're still scientists, and they use the scientific method.
Yeah.
Right. And I would even venture to say that some theologians use the scientific method to some extent.
Yeah, for sure. I will tell you that I try to be very scientific in my approach to even just pastoring. So I'm not the person that's going to tell you that if you're struggling with mental illness that it's demonic oppression.
Yeah.
Like, no, you could have
illness.
You could have mental illness. Like, you could have clinical depression.
And that's not saying that spiritual warfare isn't a thing.
Yeah, it's not to say that, but it is to say that
mental health is a real thing.
And modern medicine has helped.
Yeah.
For a lot of people. I'm also not the one to say that if you break your leg, I'm not going to call 911 and just pray for you to be healed. Like, I'm going to pray for you to be healed, but I'm also going to call 911.
So basically what we're saying is that scripture and science don't necessarily have to fight each other. They might work together.
Yeah, they don't have to be in conflict with one another. And if we don't make them in conflict, they're not. Here's the big reveal. I don't think the Bible cares about science. I don't think that's what God is trying to communicate in Scripture.
Yeah.
Like, I don't think it cares.
Yeah.
It's doing something else. And so with that, one of the things that happened is, and we have to remember this, we view the world through a sacred, secular divide.
Yeah.
So we have things that are sacred and we have things that are secular. The ancient world doesn't view the world that way.
No.
Everything is just what happens. And it's this mixture of sacred and secular. We need to do this on Pints and Perspectives, but there's a book called, it's titled The Secular Age by a guy named Charles Taylor. And it's fantastic at detailing this out. But because we view the world that way, we have made a dichotomy between theology and science that the ancient world never would have seen because of our worldview. Because someone came in and had evidence and was trying to take authority away from the Catholic Church. The Catholic Church reacted against it, even to the point that they collected all of Galileo's writings and wouldn't publish them because of how dangerous it was to them having supreme authority.
Yeah.
It was a narrative of power.
Yeah. What it really comes down to is, if science contradicts my narrative, then it can't be true.
And the other side.
Right.
If my narrative is contradicted, or if my narrative is science and the Bible contradicts it,
then the Bible can't be true.
Right. So that's fundamentalism, which is if science contradicts my narrative. Liberalism is if the Bible contradicts my narrative.
Right.
So a moderate position, which is what we at Wellhouse try to be, would be somewhere in between.
Yeah.
Where we find a way to affirm what science is saying, but also stay true to Christian orthodoxy. And if we can find that position, there's room to talk about climate change.
Yes. And that leads us to the end. These next couple weeks, I think, actually, we're going to be talking about climate change and creation care, and whether or not we as Christians should actually care about it.
Yeah, is it something that we should even care? Should we take the garden approach to tend for it, or should we take the Paul approach that all these things will pass away? Join us next week to find out.